What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Now that it is summertime here in Vermont, we wanted to give you an update on a couple of projects that we've been working on outside of our house. In our last video, we showed you the whole process of building our raised garden bed, and you'll see that it has filled out wonderfully. We ended up getting a lot of starts from a local farm to kind of fill out our garden bed because the growing season here up on the mountain is really short. So we really needed to make sure that we were making the most out of the time that we have. Quick overview of the different vegetables that we are growing in our garden. We have a bunch of kale kind of scattered throughout. Taking up most of the space down here is our squash. We have a bunch of broccoli plants as well. Different kind of lettuce. We have Brussels sprouts in the back, which I'm super excited about. I've never actually grown Brussels sprouts before. And then just a bunch of tomatoes. We're just super happy with how the garden is turning out, and it's definitely the best garden that I have ever had, so I am super happy with it. The other garden that we have on our property that I don't think we've shown you guys yet is our perennial flower garden. We've been working on this garden for 2 years since we first moved into our house, and we kind of made it with the intention of it being a little bit of a wild perennial garden that, aside from a yearly maintenance, we don't really touch this garden that much. We kind of let it do its own thing. A really good place to get plants, especially if you're looking for perennials, is going to your local nurseries at the end of the growing season. So around, for us, that's like September, and getting perennials that are on sale because they're just trying to sell everything before the end of the season. So some of the plants that we have in our perennial garden are actually plants that we were able to transplant from other parts of our land or family members' houses and move into our garden. One of those plants is a thimbleberry, which we have right here, which creates these really pretty pink flowers, and it actually does create a berry too. You won't really ever see this berry in a grocery store because its shelf life is so short and it's a very tender berry, but they are delicious. The thimbleberry has these really wide leaves, kind of like a maple, and the berries are similar to a raspberry. Another thing that we have in our garden are honeyberries, also known as hascaps. We ordered these berries online. They originally come from Canada, so they're very hardy. They grow in zones 2 to 3, and they're one of the earliest to mature in the season. The actual berry is very elongated, kind of like a very oval blueberry. We also decided to plant a perennial vegetable in our garden here, and one of the most successful perennial vegetables in our area is asparagus. So we actually have one baby asparagus here that's ready to harvest. Delicious. The perimeter for our garden is made of rocks that we collected from various parts of our property. Since we have our tractor, it makes it really easy to get pretty big rocks and move them around. And so that's what we made the border of our garden with, and then filled it with dirt from a different part of the land. So a common trend with the projects that we like to build are that we try to make it as naturalistic as possible. So that's why we made our garden perimeter out of rocks from the land. That's also why with our raised bed, we use trees from our land, because we really like to make all of our building projects and structures look natural and be in harmony with nature. Love kombucha, and over the last couple months, something I've really gotten into is making my own kombucha. So today is the time when my kombucha is done with its first ferment. So I have to do the next step in the process, which is to flavor it and put it into smaller jars, and then get my next batch of kombucha up and running. I have mandarins, pineapple, apple, and lemon. Juice. It almost looks like beer. I have all my jars, so I'm gonna add a little bit of juice to each jar and basically make the flavorings for all of the kombucha. My next step is to take the SCOBY out of each of my black and green kombuchas, put it to the side with 2 cups of the kombucha, and then use what I have left to add the kombucha to all of the juice that I have just jarred out. So now that each one of the jars has the juice and the kombucha in it, I have covered each one of them and labeled them with the flavoring that I used in each of them. I like to do this because it lets me have an idea of what flavor pairings I think work well together and what I want to try again or don't want to try again. So now that they're all labeled, I'm going to put them on the counter for about 2.5 days to let them do their second ferment. And after that, they will go into the fridge. The amount of time that I let it have the first ferment and the second ferment is kind of a personal preference. Some people do 10 days for the first ferment. I personally like to do 16 days for the first ferment and then about 2.5 days for the second ferment. That's when it builds up the carbonation. So those time frames are totally up to your personal preference, which is one of the things I think is really cool about making your own kombucha. Not only can you totally customize the flavors that you add to them, you really get to choose all the different parameters of how it actually turns out. The next step is to start making my next batch of kombucha. So earlier I set aside the SCOBY and a little bit of the fermented tea. So what I've done is cleaned out the jars and made new batches of tea. So I take 6 tea bags of black tea and green tea and steep them. I put in a 3/4 cup of sugar to each of them. And now I'll put in some water to cool it down. And then we'll add the SCOBYs and the little bit of fermented kombucha back into these, and then they'll get going with their first ferment. It's time to do the last step, which is adding the SCOBY and the kombucha back into the jar. Jars of kombucha are ready to be covered up. So I'm using a coffee filter to cover my jars of kombucha. You can also use a cheesecloth, which I've used previously, but in the summer months, the coffee filter does a better job of protecting the kombucha from fruit flies. So now they'll sit on the shelf for the next 16 days until they're ready to be jarred up.
So we have a pretty exciting update with our sawmill. 2 things. 1, we moved it here. Then, once we got it here, the motor died. And after being out of commission for about 2 months, we finally got a new replacement motor, swapped it in, and we're about to make our first few cuts with this new motor.
So it has been a couple of years since we have shown the sawmill on our channel. This sawmill is a 1998 Norwood sawmill that we have restored and has kind of been a continual work in progress as we've used it throughout the years. Sawmilling is one of our favorite ways that we are self-sufficient because it allows us to take trees that have fallen in the woods and mill them into usable lumber that we've used for all kinds of different projects. I have this simple bouquet that I made from some bee balm and other flowers in the garden. This pink one smells so good. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and catching up with some of the stuff that we have been up to this summer. We'll see you on the next one.
Peace.